4 पोलिंग स्टेशंस पर हाईकोर्ट बार इलेक्शन मैनुअल वोटों की गिनती मुकम्मल कर ली गई है।
न्यूज स्टूडियो से अब तक के लिए इतना ही।
देखते रहिए सिटी 42 और रहिए शहर की हर खबर से बाखबर।
सुनो जी, एक पते दी गल, सस्ते के चक्कर में आना मतलब सेहत पर बड़े पछताना। कुकिंग ऑयल और बनास्पति हो साडा दिल तो सेहत और बचत हो झिलमिल।
गुज़िश्ता 60 बरसों में हम दोनों ममालिक ने पाकिस्तानी कौम की बुनियाद को मिलकर मजबूत बनाया। हम ज़राअत के शोबे में इंकलाब लाए। हमने पावर स्टेशंस और डैम्स बनाए जिनसे लाखों लोगों को बिजली मुहैया हुई। आज भी हम मज़ीद लाखों पाकिस्तानियों की जिंदगी को बेहतर बना रहे हैं। क्या हम यकीनी बना सकते हैं एक ऐसा पाकिस्तान जो आने वाले दिनों में हर चैलेंज का मुकाबला कर सके? आओ कर दिखाएं।
चूजी टोमेटो से बना कनौर केचप अब 25 रुपए तक की बचत के साथ।
Kenwood का DC इन्वर्टर AC
अब सर्दी में भी छूटेंगे पसीने।
Event of the day is brought to you by
Kenwood का DC इन्वर्टर AC
अब सर्दी में भी छूटेंगे पसीने।
in association with
पाकिस्तान के बेस्ट बैंक UBL के साथ।
UBL, where you come first।
और इन्हीं इम्परफेक्शंस के साथ परफेक्ट होना मुझे अच्छा लगता है।
Went to fight in World War I and who ended up in a prison camp in Germany. So we'll be focusing more on Punjab, which is appropriate since we're in Lahore. So I'll hand over to Julia and Elka now to tell us a little bit more about the project itself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Nida. I will start giving a short background from where the project started. Could you please? So the project started almost 3 years ago with me reading an article including this photo. It's a colored postcard from 1914, from more than 100 years now back. And it shows a mosque in a tiny village south of Berlin. And actually this mosque was built inside the prisoner of war camp that was called the Half Moon Camp. And I hadn't known about it, and this mosque was the first mosque that was actually ever built in Germany. It was built by the Foreign Office inside the camp for the Muslim prisoners of war. And it was part of the so-called jihad program in the Foreign Office during First World War, which was a program that tried to make political use of the idea of jihad to fight the enemies and to ask, in that case, Muslims to change sides to fight the British and French and Russian in a jihad together with the Ottoman Empire and the Germans, who were allies. So the Germans with the Ottomans, the Sheikh issued a fatwa calling Muslims to fight with them, with the Ottomans and the Germans. So this mosque was part of the idea to welcome Muslims to fight with the German army and to make prisoners of war from the British, French and Russian army change sides. And I was fascinated to find this story. And we live both in Berlin, and the site was just a few kilometers south of Berlin. And today you cannot see much of the camp, but the only street in Germany that is called Mosque Street, Moscheestraße, is also there. There's no house at all. It's almost in the middle of a forest, but there's a Moschee Street. Next one, please. So this is another historical photo from the camp showing the inauguration of the mosque in 1915, actually. There were, in this camp, the Half Moon Camp, there were roughly almost 2,000 prisoners of war, not that many. There was a camp close by that had a few more. And then, we did further research, and inside the camp as part of different propaganda. There were different newspapers. One was called El Jihad. It was published in different languages. The other one was called Hindustan, so that would raise more nationalist feelings, give promise of independence if Germany wins the war. So this was also calling people to uprise against the colonizers, against the British and the French. Not as fast, please. It's going too fast. So, yeah, I quickly go through this. You all have the booklet also, which talks more about the history. So this is a poster in Urdu calling people to give war loans to finance the war. This was also part of what happened here. And we were fascinated because for us, First World War was always about, it's a European thing, it's the front in France, and we were so surprised to find out that more than 1 million people from the subcontinent were recruited by the British, so it's a huge number actually. So another important, like one reference point is this propaganda, jihad propaganda, nationalist propaganda, and the other reference point are different archives about that history. And there's one sound archive, and here you see a photo from inside the camp where a recording is being made by a linguist who wanted to record, and document as many languages as he could, so he would travel to different camps, actually record in the languages of the people who were there. And there is a sound archive from these 100-year-old recordings that are relatively well preserved, and here you can see the setup where the prisoners were voluntarily or not, this is not so clear, being recorded speaking into this funnel. So this was also one of our inputs when we approached contemporary artists for the exhibition. And these recordings come along with files, like typical German order bureaucracy. So we do have a file for each recording. So there are names of prisoners of war who gave their voices, who had their voices recorded. And what remains today to be seen south of Berlin is an Indian cemetery. That's what it's called. So those prisoners of war who died in the camp and whose remains were not returned, they are still buried in the middle of the forest south of Berlin. And you have this war grave, you have the British War Grave Commission or Commonwealth War Grave Commission that is taking care of these graves that are from Hindu, Sikh and Muslim soldiers. And so this was like a very fast ride through the historical reference point for our art project, which led us to different places, which Elke will talk about. And among them also, this is the war cemetery in Karachi, which looks actually, so it's the same design of the stones that this commission uses. So yeah, we wanted to end the historical reference with showing a few pictures of these graveyards that look the same in the village of Wünsdorf in Germany and in Karachi also. Yeah.
So Julia gave you this fascinating historical background. I also didn't know before. As Julia mentioned, for me World War I was Western Front, was France. And within these 100-year memorial on World War I, also I had the feeling, or you can see it by the publishing, which was published in Germany or over Europe, the whole aspect of South Asia was not really well represented. And our task was now how to transform these historical situation into an art exhibition, because we didn't make an historical exhibition with presenting historical documents. This is what we didn't want to do, but working with contemporary art, because we are convinced that artists can get a different approach to it, can make things visible which are in between the lines, which are maybe not, which are not covered by a text which is written about it. And so we started researching on artists from India, from Pakistan, from Europe, so it was not country specific, who are interested or who work in such, who worked already on these subjects. And we started with the first encounter with 4 artists in Bangalore in December 2015. And we continued to the second encounter in Karachi. This was in May last year. And we had with already more artists, including artists from Pakistan. And we had a show then in Berlin, the third encounter, in September, also adding more artists. So the whole exhibition grew during the period of research. And I can give you some examples now. You can see them today and Monday till Friday at Alhambra Gallery, because we brought the whole exhibition from Berlin now to Lahore. And just to give you some examples, because 2 of the artists are sitting here and they can talk about their work much better than me, but just to give you an example how we approach this. So we had Sanat Banerjee, who is like working mostly in the field of graphic novel, and he gave some short panels in giving a really, as he mentioned in the title, a reduced history of World War I in India. And this is now we have it like a poster hanging from the wall. Next. This is a German, this was the work by the German artist Judith Raum, whose work was focused on the propaganda from the Germans who worked on this jihad strategy, and the Bureau for Intelligence spread propaganda material all over the Middle East, Black Sea region, and all countries which are under the what? And we have this work here in an adjusted form because we couldn't bring everything, but you see the amount of material which was produced and spread all over these regions. And she made, it's not about that you can read everything, but just to give an idea of this whole approach of it. This is the work by the Tentative Collective, which are among us here. And they also worked on this archive and tries. They picked up one person who were represented in this work, but they made actually a negative approach. They focused on what history doesn't talk, or what history is not talking about, or what is excluded in all these documents. And they made a fictive screenplay of one prisoner whose biography we actually have.
Yeah, so it's Julian Elkir shared the archives with me. I asked for Urdu, Punjabi, and Hindi clips, and basically these were folk tales or songs, and it was as if these prisoners were either talking to themselves or hoping against hope that their voices would be heard back home at some point. So these are strange stories. I mean, even though these are stories that I'd heard from childhood of, for example, how a parrot escapes a hunter, but the way they were told were, there was so much tragedy in them. And simple counting. I mean, there were some clips where they were just simply counting 1, 2, 3, and so the quality and the sound of these archives, they made me started thinking of what else was going around at that time. So on the one hand, when these at the turn of the century, of the end of 19th, early 20th century, there was a lot of rebellion as well, and there was these independent kind of movements going on, and so the Kalapani jail was getting filled up, and Kalapani jail was always like an abstract idea for me, when I had heard stories of it as a child. But I actually came across the image, and I had never realized before that it was actually like a planned jail. And that was also built around that time, around the beginning of the 20th century. And so it's this, the image on top is Kalapani jail. And so I was actually looking at the idea of how, on the one hand, there were these rebellions that were being put into the jail, into the Kalapani jail, and on the other hand, there were these prisoners who were enticed into fighting a war which was not their war. And so, like connecting different points in history into this little installation. And so there's this quilt with the image of Kalapani jail, and then the bottom bit is an army blanket from the second-hand market, and put together. And then the installation has this painting which is done from a poster, propaganda poster from the World War. And initially I was using some of the sound clips also, but because there was already so much sound in the exhibition, we decided to just keep these two bits.
Okay, thank you, Risham. So I'll hand over to Muzammil Ruhil, who will tell us about his contribution.
Well, I have never been into this situation before, where I have to sit on this side. So this is the second time. Very first time was my marriage. I was sitting on the stage because of my wife, and I think this is the second time I'm sitting here. It is just because of her also, because she replied to that email that I will sit here. Coming back to the point, my work actually was, let's consider last week, and we know that what is happening around us, and now I am going to talk about something which is very little in front of the whole scenario. So my whole idea actually started from this archive that I've been going through, which was about this, which were these letters that I've seen from the people back home. They were trying to send their letters to those soldiers who wants to send their letter back to their land. So they were half, censored or something like that. So I wanted to, tell that thing in a different way. I had so many ideas. I was going through a lot of poetry that was going on at that time. So I thought I should write. I actually wrote this story, which is a fictional story, and I made this two character because I was not there and I can't claim that I have seen it. So I use Jugni as one of my collaborator to say what I wanted to say. So this story is about this Jugni whose lover is gone to the war, and he sends a letter back to the Jugni, and this and I wanted to visualize how that censored image would be of the letter. So I wrote this letter. She kept that letter with her. Because she doesn't know how to write and read, so she keeps that letter for like 6 months, and later she decides to go to someone and share the letter and try to ask, okay, what is written, and I want to answer that. She goes to this guy who's the letter writer in the village, and she give it to the letter writer and asks her to read it out. He reads it out in a very broken manner, and then she says, okay, now I want to reply, and he starts writing, and half of the time she was cursing that you might not be able to express my feeling through words and all that. So later, when she gets done with the letter, she took that letter and go back. And I was, the letter writer was kind of wondering what's happened, what is happening. She, why she's not sending it, away, because and later this girl came to this letter writer after like 6 months or so, and she gives those letter back to the letter writer and says that Jugni has gone somewhere. I don't know what is written inside, so you keep those letters. And I found out that the letter was not sent back to that guy because she didn't have the address to send it back to. And those letters I have tried to remake and displayed here, because in the whole story I was the letter writer, and I have seen the whole thing with my eyes. It's like after 100 years they come to me and talk to me about it, and I give those letters to them, to share my story, what I had and what I have written to them. So it was more likely a story that was narrated through those two works that might not give you the idea behind the whole story, but it was so dense and layered in those things. So I wanted to keep that mystery to it. So that is why these two works are there in this manner. Yeah, so this was the work.
So I think I'll hand over to Ali Usman Qasmi, who will give us a little bit more of a historical background of what was happening, and maybe your comments on this project as well.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I believe this is a fantastic project, because it's such an incredible human tragedy, which is First World War, or any kind of war, and especially from South Asian perspective, and people from South Asia who contributed in so many different ways. But still, it's largely forgotten, the contribution which came from South Asia in terms of money, in terms of men, and the losses which were suffered. And there is no better way of remembering it through other than through creative or artistic recollection of that period, for which there is kind of an amnesia which exists in Pakistan and India, and even in Britain, where people have largely forgotten about the contributions which were made from this part of the world. Now, coming back to the larger historical question, I believe that this political economy of militarism in South Asia, you can trace it back to the 19th century, where with the coming of the British, there are many changes which take place. Now, this broader region has generally served as a recruiting ground for mercenaries, and for different kinds of wars, and not necessarily for any ideological reasons. And they have been tied with different dynasties and different people who are willing to offer money. Now, what happens with the coming of the British, that they try to regularize this kind of recruitment pattern, that they remain mercenaries in terms of ideological terms, but then at the same time it's a very regular army which they're able to raise during the 19th century, and in doing so they are in a way very rigidifying their communal identities as well. So there is a book by Niall Green, for example, where he talks about Barak Islam. The idea being that recruits who were Muslims, recruits who were Hindus, and the British had an idea that since they are Muslims, they ought to be treated in a specific manner. And the need to have these fighters available in huge numbers, a grand scale of military recruitment started immediately after 1914, and the numbers swelled to beyond 1 million in the Indian military, and the bulk of it came from Punjab and from the frontier region as well, which was hugely disproportionate to the population of Pashtuns and Punjabis in the British Empire. So, which is to say that the military composition had a disproportionate share of Punjabis and Pashtuns in India, and some people put that number close to, I think, 40% as well, especially by the time Second World War broke out, which led to another massive recruitment drive. And it's not just that people were being recruited, it was also that they had to be rewarded for their service. So it's a huge infrastructure which had to be put in place, especially in Punjab. So in every single district in Punjab, there had to be a military board which would take care of people who came back from the front, who had to be paid their pensions, who had to be given a small piece of land, who had to be provided for health and medicine. And so it's a huge military economy which comes into existence in colonial Punjab, and which continues to be the case after partition as well. So some of the patterns or structures which were put in place during the colonial period, during the First World War, have an afterlife as well, and they continue to shape much of Pakistan's political economy, which, in a way, Asha Jalal puts it as the origins of martial rule in Pakistan and the political economy of that martial rule, which has very, very strong economic base established during the colonial period. So I think this is something which is very relevant, and the fact that people don't talk about it does not really mean that it's kind of a forgotten aspect of history. So it's a human tragedy which can be recalled in a beautiful, creative, artistic manner, and then there is a purely academic, historical side.